Too often, as BAs, we're handed a project brief, if we're lucky, or just some emails, and told to get cracking. But if we don't start by understanding the world that brief lives in, its strategy, systems, constraints, and ambitions, we risk delivering the wrong thing really effectively. Today, I'm sharing 10 reasons why you must start with the big picture, drawing from real-world experience through leading the career system strategy work at the Tertiary Education Commission here in New Zealand about 10 years ago.
The Better Business Analysis Institute
presents the Better Business Analysis podcast with
Benjamin Walsh.
Right, thanks for joining me this week as we count down the 10 reasons why BAs must begin with context. Start with the big picture. This is probably the number one tip for junior or medium BAs who have just got a lot of experience but never quite get to have that elevated conversation. This by far is a strength of mine, and it has helped me move along the career path to what I would say a more technical BA to a business BA, and now really a strategic analyst or a business architect, if you like. We're going to count down this top 10. It's so important that context is key. And this episode has been triggered through two posts this week. One by Ian, he'll know who he is, who posted the idea of making sure that you use visuals when communicating. It's a great technique, and I strongly believe that, and that's very useful when we define the big picture, especially when we are trying to learn something. And also a piece in my consultancy work this week when I was trying to explain to someone the big picture, which was kind of missing. It was a missing piece in the puzzle that was stopping them moving forward. And I'm going to use an example here. I won't talk about the people or any sensitive information, but I was involved in a big piece of work designing the career system strategy for New Zealand. And that was from ages 7 to 75. Every single person in the country, it was a career system for them. As I worked originally in Careers New Zealand, with my stakeholders being internal stakeholders or people that fed into it, were career counsellors who worked in schools. And the idea was this would be used across the country. Now, even though I moved on from TEC after we didn't get funding for the solution side, that analysis still lives today. And I know that they've leveraged that in the solutions that they develop now and in the future. So, number one, what is number one? Number one is that the project is not the problem. Most projects exist because of deeper challenges or ambitions. Projects are the response, not the root. And we talk about that with the 4P plus model. If you don't know what that is, look on my LinkedIn account, look on the Better Business Analysis Institute website and blogs. Before, just top tip, you start with people, then there's process, then there's the project that you're doing. Now, the career system, and this could be in your country, any career system, and this is a career being jobs, if I'm saying that with a New Zealand twang. The career system initiative wasn't about building a new tool. It really wasn't. Yes, we looked at tools, but it was about a response to systematic, fragmented system problems across career advice, education pathways, vocational pathways, and employment. It was a big gap. So ask yourself, what is the project you're working on? What is it in response to? In every kickoff, and ask the question. Number two, you're not delivering a product. You're shaping the system. And this particular example I'm using is quite a shift. It was quite a shift in thinking. It was a system, a big example. But you might be working on something that's a little bit smaller, as we will have. Might be working on a widget as part of a greater process, but I still want you to have this mindset always. Think system, not screen. Products are just one output of much bigger systems. So when you're developing the app, like you're creating an app maybe for email or Outlook, Microsoft just published the new Outlook desktop client and they've updated the app on the website. That's all part of the Exchange Outlook ecosystem. It is not just that one app, okay? And not only that, that's the internal view, but the external view is that checking your email is only part of the workflow you might go through. You might need to look at your calendar events. You might need to respond. You might need to add attachments. There's all sorts of ecosystem that goes around that, like integrating email clients, for example. At TC, we recognized we weren't just making a student tool. We were influencing students, parents, industry, iwi, training providers, and employers. And we actually had to reach out to those various other government agencies, like we have the Ministry of Social Development, if you like, which is the people that help get New Zealanders into work and look at skills development, and MB, which is the business division of our government department. They're all different, which makes it complicated. And we had to work with those various government departments to make sure we were designing a system that was not just focused on what we were doing at TC. And so what you could do, the practical tip, is to sketch a quick system map before you write your first requirement. And so there's two things here. One is the system map if you're doing system change. When I say system, this is not IT system. This is high level, government system services that the government provides. And a context diagram is always key. It's just a non-negotiable for me in your project. So that could be used. You could show how your thing, your project or your product, and it doesn't matter how big that is, show it in reference to its environment or its ecosystem. Number 3 is that stakeholders might not understand the context themselves. And this is really important. You may need to lead the discovery, not wait for it. Most of the time I have projects and people are not thinking about this. They're definitely not thinking about it when they're asked to maybe change a policy. Cause and effect analysis is not done well. When they're deep in a project, even various ministers of government will be focusing on their bit. It's actually the BA's job, or the BA is the best placed person to look at that and how that system might change. Okay. Service designers think about it, but they might not even think about the service. They're biased towards the service they're designing, whereas a BA, or definitely an enterprise BA, can look across the system or the response that your organization is providing in response, to the system needs, and they can look at it end to end. It's not around one department. It's definitely not even about one organization in most cases. So not one single stakeholder at TC had the full picture. No way. We created share artifacts, context diagrams, and strategic maps to align everyone. And actually what I used was meta modeling techniques, and I used the concept of the key nouns that we would need, like qualification would be one and job would be one. And we designed it in that way so people could understand it. It was simple. It was visual, as Ian talked about, but you could talk about complicated things in a wider environment. You could talk about it with a principal, which we did. We talked about it in schools, which we did to students, and we could talk about it to the career planners internally and to management internally to get buy-in. You can use workshops to build share context as well, and not just collect requirements. For this particular work, which was system change work, the requirements are so down the chain. That's like of 20% of the job, the 80% is actually building these systems and showing inputs and outputs at a very, very high level. And I might actually do a whole podcast on how to do that very well. And it's actually simple if you know how to do it. Number 4 is that requirements often emerge from patterns and not people. So don't expect stakeholders to hand you good requirements. Discover them through analysis, which is requirements elicitation. We don't do requirements gathering, even though I might use that term. I'm really meaning elicitation. By comparing the needs of schools and career changes, so that was one of our persona categories, or lots of personas, and employers, we identified common decision points that shaped a reusable data model. So there are lots of steps in that. I won't go deep today, but we had different categories. We had people that were in education, cool, and there were various different types, 3 categories within that. We had people that were in work, and we had people that were out of work. And those, yes, there could be an overlap between those, but that were our highest level categories. Within there, we had people that were happy in their job, people that their job was going to change, like due to AI or automation. We had people that were looking to rise up within the ranks of their organization, and we had people that were looking to, change within an organization. And then we had within schools, it was easier to do that by age. So we could divide it by very young children, and we had kind of the primary, secondary, and tertiary study, and tertiary could be any age. And then we also had the people in the category here that were supporting those people. So we had quite a lot of different persona types, the influencers, and that helped us drill down to the needs and the jobs that they needed doing and what information they would need. So it was quite easy for us to know that even though everyone was following the same journey, a younger child will just have interests. And if you overlay a whole lot of, research across there, it was very clear that there were requirements around showing how a child could use their interest to map to job areas, not specific jobs. They might think about being a firefighter. They might think about specific elements, but their interests could actually be mapped, so they wouldn't explicitly know this, to maybe job areas that they could talk about. And interests were very, very, very important for children at a young age. And there were also research we did on biases. So there was a whole idea about the inspiring the future work that had been done in the UK, whereas it was clear that for a young child, their prospects of what they think they can be when they grow up is shaped by their environment and the people they interact with. And as a result of that, there were some barriers that needed to be broken down. So an example would be people don't associate, or young children don't, and probably us adults don't associate a woman being an astronaut, and maybe a woman being a firefighter, even a doctor or a lawyer. And so the idea was to expose those children to those choices, so their idea about what they could be when they grow up was not limited. And that's a very, very important part of the puzzle. And I'm going deep on that, but it shows you how much insight didn't come from any stakeholder at TEC, came from research, came from real life examples in the system. So look across audiences and ask, what's the shared logic here, and build that logical model. That's your job as a BA. Number 5 is to use strategic tools, right? And they belong in your toolkit. BAs aren't just delivery machines. We need strategic tools, and we need to perform strategic analysis. So we use the business model canvas, pestle analysis, outcome mapping. We use things like downstream flows. We use these meta models of data flow, just showing how information moves. We use this idea of entities, business entities, I called them, and we linked, and we needed visualization all the way through. So there are lots of other things that you can add to your toolkit, and they're not just the standard requirements matrix and project, artifacts that you might think about. Number 7 is that empathy is easier at the macro level. Isn't that weird? Understanding the wider system unlocks deeper empathy, not just for users, but for the people funding, regulating, and relying on it. You can see at a high level how disconnected the learner journey was, for example, for people that were in schools that were maybe disadvantaged. There was one school we visited in a smaller town in New Zealand, and we went to the high school, and there was a class that the teacher actually defined as the last chance class. It were kids who were around 16 years old, and the teacher here was amazing. They paid for their own career planning resources in their own money, and they were not getting paid much. We, as the government, wasn't providing the tools for them. And this teacher would do basically anything to keep the kids in school. And some of those things would not be standard curriculum. They would be items where they would learn through visual arts, through doing performances together. It was really anything to keep them in school, because the statistically, and I guess the reality for those kids is that a lot of them who stayed in that area, their career prospects were very low. There weren't many employers in the area, and there were things like chicken farms. So their options was KFC, chicken farm, McDonald's, and that's where a large percentage of kids coming out of this high school actually went, because they didn't have career prospects in that area unless they moved out and they had ambition and they had inspiration. But this teacher was doing such a good job. Whereas flipping over, I went to quite an affluent school in where I live and met with the principal there. He was great. They were equally fantastic. And I worked with some of the kids doing some career planning exercises to learn from them, really. And they were learning about themselves. And it was so interesting to see the difference. And they were all correct. There wasn't anything I could draw away and go, oh, that's bad. It was all fantastic, but it showed you how different things are. And it provided empathy at that high level that, that there are some systematic challenges for people. Whereas you can see someone down the road who they're thinking about one individual who's unemployed, and they're like, oh, well, this person's, maybe they're lazy, and they start associating bad qualities to the individual at a micro level. But if you look at the macro level, there are some macro forces in place that are just like pushing against some of these children who had no choice by living in this area, and that's just where they were brought up. So it's quite fascinating. So if you can build personas and empathy maps early, even if it's rough, it will help you understand that, it will help your stakeholders understand that. And I've actually seen a shift in some government policies lately when we've actually been able to articulate that back to ministers who had different views, and that's quite cool. Number 8 is that the big picture shows you the boundaries. That's the other important fact. You're not solving all world's problems, even though I'd love to. You need to know what not to solve, and that's just as powerful. So we purposely didn't think about MB or MSD or the fact that, how are we going to get people into work? That was MSG's job, the Ministry of Social Development's job, another government agency. But our job was to make sure that people had career planning advice and understood the qualifications, which was our domain, and making sure they had opportunities to go and get tertiary education. And it was our understanding that, for example, after 6 months of being unemployed, the chances of you getting a job dramatically, exponentially drop, so that there was this motivation window where there was an overlap between both MSD and TEC and Careers New Zealand, which was part of TEC at that time, that we had to work together on those people, because it was going to cost the country millions and millions of dollars to keep those people on the unemployment benefit. And it also, which was Social Security in America, and it also meant that that person, their happiness, their mental health was going to go downhill. So catching people in that 6-month window of opportunity was critical for both departments. But it was very clear that MSD was the responsibility of getting people back into work, right? So maybe they needed to fund that 6-month window for intensive ability for career planning. That was not our responsibility, but we would design the services that they could use. And that's another point why this project became difficult, because then once you look at these systematic things, you make it big, then people start to gray the boundaries, and they start going, oh, well, you could be a tool for MSD, or we're using this tool in MSD, maybe you could use it. And it was like, well, that's not serving our purpose. It's not reaching the goal of what we're trying to achieve. Now, that wasn't necessarily, and I hate the fact that there were real borders between these government departments, but, and it's not just about who's paying for what, but it's really important if you just stick to your guns about your scope, as we always know about. Number 9 is that good context makes you a better facilitator, because you can talk about it. And I've had a number of times where I just haven't understood all the context, and, that has burnt me. So when we understand the wider picture, it leads to stronger conversations and engagement and silo breaking and agencies. By speaking the language of policy and system reform and outcomes, not just features, we actually got traction on board at the board level easily. And the top tip here is to be the person who connects the dots. And that's, again, a strength of a great senior BA, and it builds trust and influence. And there's no reason why you can't do that as a junior BA. So start here. I'm just giving you a fast forward so you can get your career ahead of the game. That's a bit of career advice. And number 10 is strategic BAs get invited to bigger tables. You start with the context, but you stop being known as the Jira person or the BA or the documentation writer, and you start being the one who gets it. The work involved, where I was involved in this TEC piece of work, meant that I got involved in investment logic, closed behind the door meetings, talking about funding, talking about minister priorities, elections. And also it positions yourself not just as a project BA, but as a system thinker. So if you're serious about impact, always start by asking, what is the world this lives in? The better your context, the sharper your contribution. Be the person who zooms out before you dive in. I'll see you next week.